Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Chodesh Tov, Agat Chodesh. We're learning Mishnah Beitza, Perek Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishnah Gimel, Mishnah 3. Introduction. Although one is permitted to perform the malach of slaughtering and cooking on Yontif in order to prepare food for that day, one is not permitted to do these malachas to prepare food for after Yontif. Right? Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, there are times when the Chachamim did allow people to do these malachas even when their intention is not really for the sake of Yontif. And our Mishna is going to talk about that. Examples of when you are actually able to do a malacha on Yontif, even though it is not even though it's not really for Yontif itself. Now, Mishna reads like this: Behema mesukenes, an animal that's in danger of dying. Now, if that animal dies, you can't eat it, right? It's an avela. So you want to shecht it before it dies, so that you'll be able to make use of the meat. And it's Yontif. So essentially, now we're talking about here, if you didn't eat your Yontif meal yet, so you're good to go. You'll use that animal for your Yontif meal. But you already ate your Yontif meal, which means I really don't need this animal for today, then, it would seem like you're in trouble, because how can you do shchita? How can you do the malach of shchita when it's not needed for that day? So in this case, the Chachamim said, an animal that's in danger of dying, you may not shecht, unless there's enough time in the day, to eat from it an olive-sized piece of roasted meat from it. Meaning, the Chachamim are going to say that in this situation, if you could slaughter this animal, even though you're not really going to be using it for Yontif, but if you were to slaughter it, you have enough time in the day to be able to eat from it a kazayas, an olive-sized piece of meat roasted. Roasted is the quickest way to prepare a piece of meat. Then we allow you to go ahead and do it. We'll allow you to go ahead and shech the animal if there's enough time in the day to eat a kazayas of meat that is roasted. We'll explain that soon. Rabbi Akiva says, I'll give you you don't even need that much time. Enough time to eat a kazayas, an olive-sized piece of raw meat, from the spot of its slaughter, which is from the neck, which is an area that already is kind of already cut open. It's not like you have to work too hard to get the piece of meat out of there. It's already cut there. You'll go ahead and you'll pull out a kazayas of meat. If you have enough time to pull out a kazayas of meat, an olive-sized piece of meat, raw, from there, that will be enough time to allow you to shech the animal. So both the Tanakam and Rabbi Akiva are saying that although you're not going to be needing it for Yontif itself, nonetheless, if there's enough time to shech it and to eat a kazayas from it, according to the Tanakama, it's got to be roasted. According to Rabbi Akiva, it could be a kazayas raw, straight from the area that's the most that where you slaughtered, which is already open and accessible to take the meat out from. Whichever, that's the argument about how much time you have to have in order to do this. But you may do this even though you're not going to be actually really using it. You're not going to be using it on Yontif. Now, what's the explanation to this? What's the basis for all this? So let me read to you how they explain it here in the notes. According to Torah law, if there is time to eat even one olive-sized piece of meat before the end of the day, it is permissible to slaughter their animal, even if the meat is not actually in that day. This is based on a principle known as Hayol b'mekaveh leil orchim. If guests were to arrive, the mere possibility that food might be used that day is enough to permit doing the malacha involved in preparing it. Meaning, according to Torah law, we say that you gotta do the malacha for that day, right? But the answer is that really, I'm still allowed to go ahead and do this malacha in case guests show up who haven't eaten yet. Meaning, let's say guests show up, right? They haven't eaten yet. Yeah, you have to be hospitable, right? So according to Torah law, you actually could slaughter that animal, even though you're not going to be using it, because it's possible that guests may show up. And you'll need it then. Now, if you work with that argument, you have to have enough time, right, to actually be able, right? You have to do it at a point of time where it has to be possible that if guests would show up, you could actually slaughter it and prepare it and feed it to them. So that's a certain condition. If you follow this argument, you need to fulfill that. But the point is that if I shech the animal early enough, minat Torah, according to Torah law, if I shech the animal enough, then in case guests arrive, I can feed it to them, then I'm allowed to do it. Even if I don't know guests are showing up, and even though I'm not going to be eating it. That's according to Torah law. However, the Chachamim prohibited doing so unless one truly expects to use the food on Yontif. They relaxed their rule. Okay, so the Chachamim say that, no, we don't rely on that. We don't allow you to rely on that to go ahead and just shecht in case guests show up. Okay, you're not going to actually be using it. You don't expect to use it. Then you can't go ahead and do it. However, they relaxed their rule to help prevent monetary loss and permitted a person to slaughter a dying animal as long as there is enough time left for someone to eat a small portion of it. So really the point here is like this. Midaraisa, you want to shecht an animal, go ahead. As long as you're doing it early enough for it to be shechted in a way that if guests were to show up, you can feed it to them. So according to Torah law, shecht it. But the Rabbanan don't allow you to rely on that Torah law. So we're left here with a rabbinic prohibition of not slaughtering the meat because not going to be using it today. They relaxed that prohibition in a case of the potential for monetary loss if it's possible there's still enough time to eat a kazayis from it. Meaning they're not fully saying, well, okay, you can just do it. They made a condition. They made a conditional. It's got to be enough time at least to eat something from it, which makes it similar to the Torah principle of oil. But at the end of the day, if we're allowed, they're abundant are relaxing their prohibition to help to prevent monetary loss, as long as enough time to eat a kazayis from it. However, if the animal is healthy, he may not slaughter it unless he has not yet eaten and truly intends to eat this meat as part of his holiday meal. Meaning, if the animal is good and fine, right? Midrabanan, practically speaking, the halacha is because of what the Rabbanan restricted, that the only time you'll be able to shech the animal is if you're actually going to be using it. You're actually going to be eating it. But otherwise, you can't do it. But in the case where the animal is sick, the Rabbanan relaxed their prohibition if there's enough time to eat a kazayis from it. Now, the Mishnah continues, Shchata basada, you shechted this animal in the field, which makes a lot of sense, right? I shouldn't say that, but the animal's in the field and somebody came running to tell you, oh, this animal's not doing well. So what do? You go to the field to shecht it there. And when you're shechting it there, it's pretty clear why you're shechting it. Lo yivi'ena ba'maita v'maita. Okay, you just shechted it, right? What do you do with the pieces? You don't leave it out in the field. You bring it home, right? Bring it back to the house. So we say it cannot be brought b'maita v'maita. It cannot be brought on a pole or on a stretcher. Meaning, if you have to, these pieces are kind of big, right? No. So typically you would put them on a they call it a stretcher, a pole, and you'd have two people carrying the pieces, right? Can't do that in this case. Because if you do it, then it's called avshamilsa. Then it becomes too much of a public doing. It draws a lot of attention to what's being done, and that we don't want. But you can bring it back piece by piece. It'll be a big schlep, be a lot of work. But nonetheless, you'd be able to bring one piece at a time. And by doing it that way, it's quieter, it's not so public, because even though the Rabbanan did, allow you to shech the animal if it's dying, nonetheless, because what's called avsha milsa, if it gets too public, then it becomes a zilzal of yontif, then it becomes a disrespecting of yontif, and therefore you got to do it in a more private way, in a more quiet way, which is bring back each piece by itself, which would not be done by two people, but one person would carry back each piece by himself. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.
I don't understand what they're saying about a sick animal.